with you in the Midlands, BBC Radio.
That, of course, was our star who's about to join us, actually. Hopefully we'll be listening to his music. But let's try this first. You may remember this big hit from Neil Sedaka. So many hits. Well, of course, is the global superstar Neil Sedaka, and I'm very, very pleased to warm from across the Atlantic, Neil, to the programme. Welcome to the Record Collectors, Neil.
Thank you. Nice of you to invite me.
Well, you've got thousands and thousands of fans in the UK, and I remember you not at the very beginning, because I wasn't aware that you were singing with the Tokens.
Yes, I started a doo-wop group in New York City in high school called The Tokens, and I indeed recorded with them for four songs, and then, of course, they went on their own to do The Lion Sleeps Tonight, and I went on as a solo artist.
I mean, what is I think for our listeners who should appreciate this, that your background for the younger listener was dividing time between classical studies and popular music, and of course this sometimes demonstrates in the quality of the music which you've written for just about everybody who's who in music around the world.
Well, yes, I had an extensive musical education. I started as a concert pianist, studying at the Juilliard School of Music. I attended the prep school from age 9 to 16, and then 2 years to the college level. And I did have every indication of becoming, I wanted to become a concert pianist. And lo and behold, I wrote a song called Stupid Cupid that was recorded for Connie Francis in 1958. And that changed my direction completely.
Well, that was actually a multi-million selling record, of course. But there was a record that comes springing to mind which was called The Diary, which was a very early record, wasn't it?
That was my first one as a singer-songwriter. It was in 1958, a bit after Stupid Cupid, Connie Francis's recording. I was auditioned for RCA Victor Records, and Steve Scholes, who had discovered Elvis, signed me in 1958 to a singer-songwriter contract.
All right. Let's just move along a little bit, because I Go Ape, of course, was again a platinum record, wasn't it? It was a huge global super seller for you. I mean,
well, it was the biggest in the UK because you guys have good taste.
Neil, it's Chris here. I want to ask you a couple of questions. One, actually, I want to jump back a little bit, but I'll pick up on I Go Ape. It has been said by many people that I Go Ape is one of the best rock and roll records of the time, and this actually has come from a guy in Florida. So you see, we're in Britain, but we've had an email from Florida. But he says, would you ask Neil how he rates You've Got to Learn Your Rhythm and Blues as against I Go Ape?
Oh my, he's a real fan.
He is.
Learn Your Rhythm and Blues was a flop for me. It was came before O'Carroll, and it was in the rhythm and blues style, but I Go Ape was more of the rock and piano, like the Jerry Lee Lewis type, who was popular at the time and was a very good artist that inspired us.
Now, I've got another question here, because we get questions in from the listener, because we let people know. The question is, and I'm sure that I might be wrong here. I think the gentleman maybe got the groups confused, but he says, was there any connection between Neil Sedaka and the Willows? I thought it was Gene Pitney, but I might be wrong. Were you involved in any way with the Willows, who recorded Church Bells May Ring?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I played this is a bit of trivia, I played the bells on Church Bells May Ring.
Right.
And Morty Kraft was the producer of the record, and he did produce the Willows with a Neil Sedaka song called My Angel,
right,
which was not as successful as Church Bells May Ring, but I did play the bells on Church Bells.
Right, and another one, this is from me. One of my favourite early records of yours is Moon of Gold. Can you tell me a little bit about how it came to be written and recorded?
We called it Broadway Country. Howard Greenfield and I wrote several in that style. The Same Old Fool, Run Samson Run. But Moon of Gold was one of my favorites. I loved the double tracking on it.
Yeah.
I love to sing harmony with myself, and that became a Neil Sedaka trademark. Thank you for remembering Moon of Gold.
Thank you, Neil.
The Brill Building, of course, when you wrote Stupid Cupid, you became then a regular songwriter. I mean, that seemed to be almost driving your career. Was it Hal Nevins and Don Kirshner that you were working with?
Yes, Al Nevins and Don Kirshner were my first music publishers, and they were also my managers.
Oh.
And we were together for a good 5 years. They were in part of the Brill Building, and Howie and I were one of the first songwriting teams to be signed to the Brill Building, Alden Music, and then I took a friend of mine, Carole King, up to be signed.
I have to tell you, we've just actually had somebody call the show, Jay Siegel of the Tokens, and he says,
my goodness.
And Jay's just said, will you tell Neil hi?
Well, we go back many years.
Yeah.
I heard him singing in his beautiful falsetto voice in the math class in Lincoln High School. He sat next to me, and I asked him if he wanted to join my group, the Tokens. He's a wonderful guy.
Just want to ask you about, how did you get the inspiration? I mean, I went onto the internet today, to your official Neil Sedaka website, and looking at some of the artists you've written for, be it Little Eva, Johnny Mathers, The Monkees, Clyde McPhatter, Elvis Presley, Wanda Jackson, Jan and Dean, Tony Christie, Rosemary Clooney, Neil Diamond, obviously, that Happy Birthday Sweet 16 was up on the roof, Yvonne Elliman, Connie Francis, you did lots with Connie Francis, Crystal Gale. I mean, the list is Fifth Dimension, Shirley Bassey. I mean, it's phenomenal. It must be over 1,000 songs.
Well, I wrote in a very comfortable vocal range. I write at the piano, and being a singer myself, I write in a comfortable vocal range. So I'm fortunate some great singers have recorded my songs, and they're melodic, and we were taught in the Brill Building to write catchy tunes with hooks and lyrics that were meaningful and lyrics that you could relate to.
Well, was there some personal experience where you got these great lines just from your own personal life?
Well, not really. Howard Greenfield was a great lyricist, and we collaborated very closely. He wrote some music, I wrote some lyrics back and forth. They were not all autobiographical. I had some in the past standing on the inside where I wrote the lyrics to. Liebe's song written for my wife. There was several of them, and I've been writing the last 15 years words and music exclusively by myself. And those songs become more personal, and yes, they come from my soul.
Neil, can I ask you about some of the songwriting? I mean, we know that Oh Carol, we've always been told, was specifically for Carole King, and she did an answer version, Oh Neil. But when you wrote, did you actually have, or were told to have, certain artists in mind, or did you just write and then somebody else placed them to an artist? How did the process?
I wrote for my own voice, and I did the first recording.
Right.
And 99% of the time, all of those singers that you mentioned heard my recording and covered my recordings with their versions. That happened with all of those singers. I think the only time that I wrote, one of the few times that I wrote specifically for someone, was when Connie Francis was doing a movie called Where the Boys Are.
Where the Boys Are, yeah.
And asked us to write a song by that title. Now,
can I ask you then, I mean, when these were placed, could you kind of tell us a little bit about what it was like in the building for recording? I mean, you two sat down, or one of you sat down, you did the lyrics, you recorded. Was it like literally a conveyor belt? And the second question I must get in as well to ask is there any way that the Real Collector can ever hear your original demo versions?
They have published the demo versions on recordings. I don't remember the title or whether it's available in the UK, but if you go on my website, neilsedaka.com, it should be listed there where you get the original demos. The first question was how I write. I sit at the piano and I come up with a melody line and a piano accompaniment, and then I would bring it into Howard Greenfield or Phil Cody or Carol Bayer-Sega, people who I collaborated with, and I would play them the tune and the piano accompaniment, and sometimes I would have, more than likely, I would have a couple of lines, and they would take it from there, and we would finish the song together. It was a very close collaboration.
Can I just say congratulations to you, because I think a couple of weeks ago your grandchildren had their second birthday.
Thank you. Yes, my son Mark 2 years ago had twin girls, Charlotte and Amanda, and they were indeed 2 years old last week.
I mean, you seem remarkably, for those guys that came out of the 50s, we've had many of them on the program over the years, but you seem to be remarkably level-headed and have got through a lot of things where other people have fallen or haven't succeeded. How have you managed this?
It wasn't an overnight success, taken from an album title of mine. Mine was a long, gradual success. I worked very hard. I took nothing for granted. I was a disciplined musician, a studied musician, so I was very serious about the work. I never forgot my roots, where I came from. My father was a taxi driver. We were very poor, living in Brooklyn, New York. And I worked very hard to attain what I have attained over these 50 years. Yes, there are a lot of temptations, but the key word is moderation. Moderation in almost everything in life, and that would keep you on the straight and narrow.
And of course you married your childhood sweetheart.
Libra and I are going to be celebrating 43 years, yes. I met her when she was 16 and I was 19. True, there have been ups and downs, as in any marriage, but the bottom line is the respect, the love, being each other's friends, enjoying each other's company, and not hitting below the belt.
Can I just say, Neil, one of our listeners' favourite records, and certainly one of mine, and one being recorded by so many artists, is Solitaire. I'd like to play that now, if I may.
I must tell you, after you play it, I'll have a story.
Okay, we'll play the record and then we'll come right back to you. Wow. That's a live version. No overdubbing. That's the voice of the great Neil Sedaka. And
every time I hear that, I weep. It's a piece of my heart. I can honestly say that I was touched by God, one of the few times that I was touched by God.
Tell us the story behind it, because it's quite famous, isn't it?
Well, I wrote it with Phil Cody, and it's been recorded by at least 30 or 40 great singers. This year in the United States, I had the thrill of having the top-selling single CD, Solitaire, recorded by a 25-year-old named Clay Aiken, who won one of our American Idol programs here on television.
Yes.
And he has a magnificent voice. But every time I hear that, I weep. There's something about the spirit of that sentiment that always gets to me.
Neil, is it not true, though, that song and the album were evolved, recorded and connected with Manchester and England?
I originally recorded that, the first one with they were called Hot Legs.
10cc.
And then became 10cc, an absolutely fabulous group. Their manager, Harvey Lisberg, heard me singing in Manchester and suggested that I go into their studio in Stockport and record an album. I liked them so much that we recorded 2 albums together. The Trolla Days Are Over and the Solitaire album. So that was in their studio.
That was the Strawberry Studios, wasn't it?
That's correct. 1972, if I'm not mistaken.
Right, now I've got to ask you, in a way, a reciprocal question, that you had them working with you, and I know earlier on you mentioned you were playing piano on the Willows. One thing I'd be very interested in is, what recordings can you think of, what artists that you have worked with where you wouldn't actually be credited, where we could say, wow, that's Neil Sedaka on piano there?
Bobby Darin, the great late Bobby Darin, was a friend, and he always asked me to play on some of his records, and it was a great honor. I played on Dream Lover, and several of his recordings.
Now, it's very, very fate taking a hand here because there is a renaissance in Bobby Darin. There's a stage show and a film about Bobby Darin, and it's all happening. So we're playing some Bobby Darin tracks later, but from what I saw of Bobby Darin, he seemed a very humorous individual, very quick-witted.
He was a marvelous live performer. He was my hero. He was the greatest supper club performer I had ever seen. He could sing any style, and he could do comedy. He played the drums. He was just an all-round entertainer.
Now, I want to cast your mind back to when the Beach Boys and the Beatles arrived, and that moment, because we've leapt slightly ahead there with Solitaire, and a nice leap ahead as well. But what happened to your career when the Beach Boys came along? How did you feel when the Beatles and the Beach Boys and all these groups came along?
Actually, the Beach Boys were having hits when I was having the hits. The Beatles and your Rolling Stones, all the English, came in around 1963 and changed the face of the pop music. And I had done very well for 5 years, sold about 25 million records around the world. And then in 63, the bottom dropped out, and I was a ghost from the past. I did continue to write for many fine singers, Shirley Bassey, Andy Williams, Tony Christie, Karen Carpenter, Captain and Tennille. But I was out of work for nearly 10 years. It was really the UK that brought me back to the fore. An agent friend of mine said that I should come back to the UK, and they still had respect for the early American rock and rollers.
That's right.
So I went back and I did some of the small venues, the Golden Garter in Manchester and the Wookey Hollow in Liverpool.
Yeah.
And I went back after all those years, and it was the UK that took me to their heart and was responsible for a remarkable comeback for me. Also, Elton John, who was a friend of mine and is a friend of mine, had a record company, and he put me on his record company, Rocket Records. And it was because of the UK and Elton that I had that unbelievable comeback in 75.
Isn't it true, Neil, that one day there's a story that you were walking down a road somewhere and somebody stopped you and said, "Excuse me, but didn't you used to be Neil Sedaka?"
Yes.
What's the story behind that?
That's very true. I had those 5 years of hits. That was the natural progression. Fats Domino, Connie Francis, the Everly Brothers. We all had 5 years, and then it stopped. Whether we were, maybe it was because I started to repeat myself and I was doing too many tra-la-las and shooby-doos. But of course, you know, in order to continue in this business, you have to take chances. You have to try different things. You have to try to keep up with the times. And what I did was I waited 10 years, and then the singer-songwriter came again, the melodic singer-songwriter, Cat Stevens, Joni Mitchell, Carole King, Gordon Lightfoot, and I started writing different songs like Solitaire and Laughter in the Rain. And that's one of the reasons that I've been around for more than 50 years, because I didn't want to do only the oldie shows.
No.
I wanted to develop and grow and do new things.
Well, there were certain things in the songs which I think the titles indicate your feelings. The Hungry Years was one which sort of said quite a lot.
Yes, you have to be hungry to want to do this and to want to create and to develop and grow. There was a song called Our Last Song Together.
Yes.
Howard Greenfield and I decided that we shouldn't have an exclusive collaboration anymore, and that he and I should write with other people. So we wrote something called This Will Be Our Last Song Together. And it doesn't make a meaningful statement.
And you wrote a song called Brighton, which of course is your hometown.
I was born and raised in Brighton, Brooklyn. Yes, I do have a Brighton.
Yeah, that's right.
Yes.
In England.
And then the song Standing on the Inside, which for you, very strong lyrics about the feeling of being excluded from your own world. It's such a great song, that.
Thank you, Wes. I was very proud of that lyric. And all the phony faces stand in line. All the backslappers know my name this time. The record business is very trendy, very fickle business. Thank goodness I don't have to rely on having a hit record today. I've become a performing artist, and the body of work is big, so I can really do so many different kinds of songs.
Neil, I just want to say, I actually have your hardback first edition book of your life story, and in it is very much I. I have to ask you a question. Did you write it, or was it in conjunction, or was it ghost-written? Be honest with me.
I wrote 90% of it,
right,
and the editor polished it here and there.
I enjoyed reading it, and I still have it in my own library at home. I enjoyed it.
I wrote it in longhand on a legal pad, and 90% is mine.
Great. You would have worked with probably all the legends that we love in Britain, and you know how I think the majority of people, certainly in the UK, have a great fondness of American music. And even the Beatles acknowledged their debt to American music and the culture of America's popular music. You must have met just about everybody. What are your strongest memories of some of our idols that you've rubbed shoulders with?
Well, meeting Elvis Presley was a great thrill. He invited my wife and I to the Las Vegas Hilton, where he was performing, and he invited us backstage after. There was a piano in his dressing room, and he loved to sing gospel songs, and I forget which one we did, but we sang together in the dressing room, and he did give my wife a scarf, which she still has today, and he told me a story that when he was in the Army, stationed in Germany, that he would play my records on the jukebox because, he had such a beautiful baritone voice, and he was very attracted to my high tenor voice. He always liked the Mario Lanzas and the people with the high tenor voices, and I, of course, was very flattered to hear that.
Well, we have so many questions to ask you, but I know your time is precious. Neil, I want to ask you one final question. If you would have written any song that you haven't written, which song would you wish you had written?
Oh, that's a good question. I think Puccini's Nessun Dorma, which to me is one of the most brilliant melodies ever written. It's from the opera Turandot. And I did get a chance to, on the Classically Sedaka CD, I got a chance to write original lyrics to Nessun Dorma. I called it Turning Back the Hands of Time, and it still gets a standing ovation in my show. But if I had if I had to choose a song that I wish I wrote the melody to, it would be Nessun Dorma.
Can I just tell a little fact about Nessun Dorma and Puccini? Puccini was a very clever man. He realised with the advent of recordings that lasted about 3.5 minutes, if he wrote things that lasted less than 3.5 minutes, they would get recorded and he would make money from it. That's very clever, isn't it?
It's very clever.
We've had many questions. One of them is, are we likely to see you in the UK in the foreseeable future, Neil?
I certainly hope so. We lived there. Lieber and I lived there in the 70s. We were just behind the Dorchester Hotel at Park Street.
Yep.
And it holds wonderful memories for me. And yes, I hope in the near future I'll be coming again to do a tour, because I really have to thank the fans in the UK for bringing me back.
Well, you'll always be standing on the inside with this program. Thank you so much for the music, Neil.
Thank you so very much. A delight to talk to you both.
Our pleasure. The great Neil Sedaka. Oh, thanks very much to our friend Neil Sedaka. If you want to call us, you still can. It's 0845 303 9303. That's 0845 303 9303.
The top story this hour.